All right, welcome to episode 1 of the Mostly Cricket podcast. This is the first official long form episode on this channel. It's obviously different to the dailies that I was bringing you earlier in the week and that I will bring you in the future. It's just a chance to really get stuck into some longer form discussions, and who knows, maybe we can have some good, informed, lively debates in the comments about some of the topics and some of the things that I say. So without further ado, let's get into it. Australia are heading to Adelaide, looking to get stronger team-wise with the return of Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon, you would think, given it's Adelaide. Usman Khawaja, it sounds like he might be ready for selection again as well. So as far as Australia are concerned, they're going to have their full squad to pick from in terms of choosing the final 11 for Adelaide. So things are looking great for them. I guess the only bad news for Australia is that Josh Hazlewood has been ruled out of the Test series on the back of some complications that he's experienced during his rehab. So he's going to be missing out. And I think most people felt like that might happen. You know, he generally has quite a when he does get injured, he tends to have quite long layoffs. And given how quickly these tests come, it's probably better for him, for his long-term fitness, that they rest him. So I guess that's the only area where Australia will probably feel a little down. But you look down the rest of that squad, it's the usual suspects. It's the same team that won the World Test Championship in 2023 and have just dominated over the last 4 years. So I don't think Australia will be too worried about that. However, for England, they have all the headaches, they have all the questions to answer, and they're in a really kind of, I don't think precarious is the word anymore. It's I guess it's do or die now, not just in terms of results, but in terms of showing people, showing the fans, and showing themselves as well that they can actually compete here. There was obviously so much build up, so much talk leading up to this series. I think a little bit, some of it was a little bit too kind of on the nose and too sort of over the top. I thought. I think cricket media in general has a tendency to deal in hyperbole. Certainly since I've been following cricket, and I would say that the media in this country tends to maybe do it a little bit too often for my liking. One day it's Bazball's reinventing Test cricket and Ben Stokes is the greatest captain of all time, and then 2 days later, after England have had a particularly bad day, all of a sudden it's everyone should be sacked, and the whole approach should be revised. And usually, as with most things, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and that's probably the least interesting thing to I guess publish in terms of headlines, because that doesn't, it's not clickbaity enough. But as is the case with most things, the truth is usually somewhere in between. And I think what we've seen after these first 2 Test matches is that it seems like, at least from what Ben Stokes was saying after the match, that maybe there is finally going to be a line drawn in the sand in terms of the approach that they've been trying to employ, not only in the first 2 games, but maybe even the last couple of years. It looks like they finally recognize that batting in this way, this throwing caution to the wind and maybe prioritizing that entertainment factor more than the actual substance, that even the players are maybe tiring. And certainly it sounded like Ben Stokes was particularly exasperated when he was talking at the end of the second Test. We'll have to wait and see if England do actually follow through on what they've been saying, or certainly Ben Stokes follows through on what he's been saying. But it raises a wider issue with this England side in all departments, batting, bowling, and even the captaincy. So I guess the big talking point is, why has England and Bazball in particular been so averse to adapting? And why has it taken them so long to recognize that maybe you just have to do the basic Test cricket things well. The things that have worked for teams, the best players for 100 years. Why has it taken them so long to accept that fact? And I think it's even more interesting given the fact that this is a side that has shown in glimpses and in certain areas that they have been willing to adapt certain areas of their game. This is a side that 2 years out from the Ashes, they recognize that, well, certainly from the top down, Rob Key, I think, was the first person I heard kind of verbalizing it. But, in Australia, at least in his mind, England needed to replace some of that medium pace, fast medium sameness, those 83 to 85 mile per hour bowlers, to replace them with some genuine fast bowlers, guys that bowl 87, 88 miles per hour plus. And they wanted to go down that route and put all their eggs in that pace bowling basket, because they felt like that was what would serve them best in Australia on Australian pitches and would give them the best chance of winning in Australia. This is also a side that in 2024, ahead of the tour of India, they recognized that they needed an array of spinners to give themselves the best chance of competing against the likes of Ashwin, Jadeja, Kuldeep Yadav, Akshar Patel on Indian pitches, and that's why they plucked Shoaib Bashir out of obscurity. They picked Tom Hartley for a left arm tall option, and we've seen Rehan Ahmed play various subcontinent matches and sort of pop up here and there. And even Will Jacks, he was selected on that tour of Pakistan in 2022, late 2022. And in addition to being a handy batter, he seems to have become England's maybe frontline spinner. So they've brought in certain players for specific bowling conditions. So this is a side that obviously can recognize when they need to deviate from what works in certain, what works at home, and then look to certain other styles that give themselves the best chance of competing in different countries. And another area where they do tend to show some, flexibility is in Ben Stokes' captaincy on the field. He isn't someone that sticks with one plan and just keeps going, for too long, which actually is a point I want to come on to in a moment, because actually in this series so far in the Ashes, maybe we've actually not seen that, and maybe we have seen some weirdly stubborn plans from him. But generally, you think of Ben Stokes' captaincy from a couple of years ago, he would be moving fielders almost every other ball, trying to create these different angles and trying to, give the opposition batter something different to think about. And so these are all examples of when England have shown that they recognize that adaptability is key and fundamental to competing in Test match cricket. However, that seems to stop weirdly with the batting, which I would argue that's the one discipline where you need to adapt the most. Test cricket is such a conditions-based game. Different countries offer such unique challenges, different teams within their own home conditions. You take advantage of their home conditions and throw all sorts of challenges the opposition's way. So, I would argue that batting is the one area where you really need to adapt and make sure you do that quickly when you do go on tours. And as I say, weirdly, that's the one area where England have been very stubborn since Bazball began. And I guess you have to kind of think back to why this batting approach came about. And it came about because under the previous regime, Joe Root and Chris Silverwood, there was a feeling that England became way too timid, way too shy of going for totals and actually taking some risks and picking batters that could try and run away with a match or a session or whatever, and try and kind of put the pressure back on the opposition in a way that opposition were putting on them for so long. It came after that harrowing statistic where England won one test from 17 matches. It came on the back of that run chase. I think it was against New Zealand in 2021, maybe. I think they had to chase down about 200 odd, and they didn't even look like going for it in the fourth innings. And that raised a lot of eyebrows. It was a side that just wilted in Australia 4 years ago in 2021, 2022, and it also was a side that, and many people don't mention this series for one reason or another, but shortly after that Ashes tour in 2021-22, they went to the West Indies and lost there as well. So for all those reasons, I think, the new regime wanted to, I guess, reignite that excitement of playing cricket again. The same kind of excitement, I guess, you feel as a kid when you're playing, or even if you play sort of on a Saturday or Sunday with your village team or your club team. They wanted to, I guess, recreate that and just let them run free. And it was almost like that first summer in 2022. It almost felt like a huge breath of fresh air and a almost like a coming out party for a lot of the players who were part of the previous regime. It was sort of like they were just told to be themselves. We accept your individual personalities, your what makes you unique. Just go out there, do what you want to do, and whatever happens, we accept you, and we just want you to just go and have fun. And I think, there was a bit of a shock factor, I think, when England first started doing that. That first sort of 6 months when they started playing this way, they had so much success against so many teams. Most of the series were at home, but still, it was such a change from what had come before. They faced some good opposition, some good bowling attacks. They've played New Zealand, who had beaten them in a series the summer prior. They had to finish off that series with India, that fifth Test match, and India came pretty much full strength in that game. And then they faced South Africa, who had a great bowling attack, and they faced some good opposition, and playing this Bazball way kind of really blew away sides in that first summer. And then shortly after, they went to Pakistan, and Pakistan at the time, they were they had those very kind of flat batting wickets where so many batters were getting hundreds and double hundreds. And I guess as a captain, trying to get 20 wickets on those surfaces was always going to be the biggest hurdle. It wasn't so much because you're going to the subcontinent. It might be spin. At that time, I think Pakistan were more leaning towards pitches which would help with their batters making runs. And for England to go there and win 3-0 with obviously scoring a lot of runs. That was the series where they scored 500 in one day. And Ben Stokes doing all sorts of weird things in the field to get 20 wickets each game. It was a great start to this new regime, and it maybe felt like, okay, the bad days are finally over, and maybe we can finally enjoy playing Test cricket again and have some success. And I think the stats are, in their first 18 games, they won 13 of them. So, when you put that side by side with the winning one from 17 games, it's like day and night, basically. However, as I say, I think there was a bit of a shock factor when it first started. Teams had not come across a side which, as a batting unit collectively, would just keep attacking no matter what. Generally in Test cricket, you have sides that maybe have one or two batters that are very aggressive and will always play that certain way. You think back to the great Australian side. Obviously, there was Adam Gilchrist, and depending on which Australian side in that kind of dynasty, you had someone like Michael Slater initially who would try and go after the bowlers. Even Justin Langer could be quite fast scoring. He might be remembered more as a bit stodgy and a bit kind of, gritty, but he used to score quite quickly at the top often. And Matthew Hayden sometimes would not go as quickly. But, they had two, maybe three people at most who would score that way. You think of the South African side, Graham Smith's South African side. They generally were known for being quite conservative and just doing the basics well day in day out. But they had people like AB de Villiers in the side who, if he wanted to, could score quickly. You think of some of the test sides now who do well. Australia being the World Test champs from 2023. They obviously have Travis Head, who is that kind of player that just tries to throw the bat, and that's the way he likes to play, and generally it comes off. But around him, the others generally play standard Test cricket and play the situation. Obviously, David Warner, when he was in his prime, at the top of the order, he would look to try and score quickly at a strike rate of 70 or 80. The Indian side at the moment, and certainly under Virat Kohli and then Rohit Sharma, Rishabh Pant was that guy that, or is still that guy that scores that way. But you look at the rest of the lineup, they generally play the situation. So that's generally been the trend with Test cricket as a whole. So when this Bazball side started to all come at bowlers, from 1 to 7, there was understandably, I think, a shock factor and shock value, which kind of took opposition by surprise. But after those first 18 games, I think sides were beginning to get kind of used to what England were doing. They had return series against England. They were getting a second look at them. They were getting, I guess, more video analysis of maybe some of these batters, and some of the new batters, guys like Harry Brook and Ben Duckett and Zach Crawley, who became more of a certainty in this Bazball regime. And I guess sides, these are all quality Test sides, best of the best technical players, the best strategic thinkers. So as time goes on, they will adapt. And I think what we've seen since those first 18 games has been sides work out where England's weaknesses are, but two, this stubbornness from England to think that what worked in that short sample size initially could be sustainable for years and years across conditions. And what has happened is basically that has been proven to be not true, which I think a lot of people who have watched Test cricket and weren't getting caught up in the hype and the hyperbole probably felt like this day would come. Since the 2023 Ashes series, they've played 25 tests, won 12 and lost 12. And, those are results that, you would expect any kind of decent test side to end up kind of leveling out on, because, you're playing some of the best teams, and, you win some and you lose some. And when you look at this England side, you wouldn't say that they are the best test team. You wouldn't say, player for player, they are, better than a lot of test teams. They have certain players that are incredible. I think Joe Root, hands down, is the best player in this England side. He is he's a true legend of the game. I think that those terms like legend and GOAT get thrown around way too often, I think, in sport and certainly in cricket. But Joe Root is undeniably a great batter, and he is someone that is as good as anyone. And I mean, in the last 5 years, he's been Test cricket's premier batter. He's basically been in form for 5 years straight. So Joe Root aside, you look at the rest of the team, and you wouldn't say that they are man for man necessarily the most the best players compared with other teams. What they've relied on heavily is this sort of collective kind of offensives that they launch on teams when maybe they're not expecting it, or sometimes even when they are expecting it. It's sometimes you might expect something, but then to still react to it and try and put out that fire, it still takes effort and still takes skill and execution. And I think that's what this England side has been relying on since this Bazball thing started. And I guess the one thing we know about Test cricket is that eventually it will separate the best from the rest. It will separate the solid cricket sides that do the basics well, do the prerequisites well, from the gimmicky, the gimmicky kind of approaches and the fads that might look good and might be attractive and like the shiny new thing for a while, but it's not going to last. And that's what we found with this England side. And basically going into the third test match at Adelaide, they're in a position now where they have, as I say, recognized that what they've been doing hasn't been working, and they're almost now 2 tests in, finally ready to start the test series, which that's not a great place to be, especially in Australia away from home. And the delay in getting to this stage is going to infuriate fans, because so many of us have been screaming out for the side to recognize this a lot earlier, and the fact that they've only really come to terms with it, at least from what they've said, again, until we see it in the flesh on the field, we won't know for sure. But the fact that it's taken them 2 tests in the series to realize it is not great, and has already kind of significantly damaged their chances in the series. Batting aside, another area which I found really interesting in terms of how England and the management speak on this topic is their sort of obsession with high airspeed in Australia, and the way they've sort of put all their eggs in that particular basket. As I mentioned earlier, the big talk was trying to come with 4 or 5 pace bowlers that they can pick from, that all operate at 87, 88 miles per hour plus. And we saw Jofra Archer reintroduced into Test cricket during the summer. Mark Wood obviously has been part of the Test side on and off. He obviously is very injury prone. He came back for that first Test, but has now been ruled out of the series. There was Gus Atkinson, there was Bryden Cast, there was Josh Tongue, and there were several others on the fringe that they were sort of bringing in here and there in home summers. And this is another area which I found quite kind of stubborn in terms of their thinking, because yes, you think of Australia and you think of the archetypal Australian fast bowler, bowling it through the chest and neck area, getting the batters kind of sniffing the ball, and you think of some of the legacy of Australian pace bowling, Dennis Lillee, Jeff Thompson, Brett Lee. But you look at sides that have done well, and even current Australian bowlers that have done well in Australia, they don't all bowl that fast all the time. There's a high level of skill involved in what some of these bowlers do. Pat Cummins, for one, is someone who, yes, he can bowl 140 plus if he wants. And, when he was younger, he used to bowl much quicker. But you generally look at his speeds, it's sort of that 85 to 87 miles per hour generally, and sometimes he goes up in the gears. You look at someone like Scott Boland, who's probably been their most consistent bowler since he's come in the side, especially at home. His bowling average in Australia is something like 15, I think. His pace is generally, 84 to 86 miles per hour, maybe, on average. Maybe sometimes a bit slower, occasionally maybe a little bit quicker, but generally it's that, 83 to 85 miles per hour range. We saw Michael Neser at the Gabba. He bowls 80 to 82 miles per hour, at his best, and he got a 5 for there. So I don't know where this particular obsession and fixation with high airspeed has come from. And even when you look at sides who have come to Australia and won in Australia, which is rare, but when they have, you think of the South African side, the Graeme Smith South African side. Yes, they had Dale Steyn and Morne Morkel, who can bowl quickly and in excess of 88, 89, 90 miles per hour. But, a lot of the spells I remember of Dale Steyn's in that series were sort of 84 to 86 miles per hour, 87 miles per hour. They obviously had Vernon Philander, who is in that sort of Michael Nisa kind of mold. He generally operates 78 to 83 miles per hour, 84 miles per hour on average. You think of the Indian sides that came in 2018, 19, and 2020, 2021. Again, it was a range of airspeeds. It wasn't. I don't think there was anyone really that was bowling consistently, 150 plus. Even Jasprit Bumrah doesn't bowl 140 kilometers per hour every ball. He relies a lot on skill as well. So this fixation with airspeed seemingly over everything else I've found quite strange, and I think it's even impeded their their selection of spin and how they handle spin. Shoaib Bashir for the last year and a half was constantly being elevated as England's first choice spin bowler. The fact that his physical attributes were reminiscent of Nathan Lyon's, and he could have a real impact on the series. And we're only 2 tests in; he may still play a part. But the fact that England have gone into the first 2 tests with an all-pace attack, and now it seems like maybe Will Jacks might be holding on to that spinner's role. So that maybe they can retain their 4-pronged pace attack or whatever. Maybe it's kind of throwing off balance all of their kind of bowling strategies and their the possibilities of having a well-rounded attack. And funnily enough, one issue that this raises, which actually Steve Smith kind of, to me, inadvertently raised when he champed Jofra Archer at the end of that last day, was England might, at their best, their first choice kind of 5 bowlers, at their best can bowl 90 miles per hour plus. Mark Wood, obviously that's the only way he knows, and he's kind of openly acknowledged that. Jofra Archer, we've seen him bowl spells, with average speeds anywhere from 90 to 94, 95 miles per hour when he's absolutely at his best. And Bryden Cass can touch 90, if things are going well. Gus Atkinson, probably the slowest of all of them, but still can touch sort of 88 miles per hour. But the fact is that sustaining that speed throughout a test, throughout a day, throughout a test, and then throughout a series, especially a 5-test series, is way more important than bowling a one-off spell at 92, 93 miles per hour. And I think that's the fundamental difference between this Australian side and this England side in terms of the bowling and the pace bowling. Australia's bowlers, whether they're bowling at 92 miles per hour or 90 miles per hour, as Mitchell Starc has been doing for a lot of the first 2 tests, or whether they're bowling at 85 miles per hour, 84 miles per hour, from day to day, that average speed doesn't really change. It's only the execution and the skill that might be slightly off, but that speed is consistent. But generally with Australia, their skills are also, the gap between the good day and the bad day for an Australian team's bowling attack is like that. Whereas you look at what England have dished out so far, not only have their average speeds been, up and down hugely, but the line and length, the pitch maps that we've seen from the England bowling attack, the strategies, it's kind of been all over the place. So, across a long series, across 5 tests, where sustaining is more important than wowing in a short space of time. England, that's another area where England need to tighten up to give themselves any kind of chance. Come Adelaide, say they do go back to kind of conventional test match batting, but if they now undo that with poor bowling again, that becomes a major issue. I guess going back to the topic of speed, it also raises the question as to, what is the best way of using these England bowlers. Stephen Smith's comments were aimed specifically at Jofra Archer, and since then, various commentators and pundits have kind of piled on to Jofra Archer, and I want to touch on that a bit, because Jofra Archer seems to be someone that always much like Ollie Pope is the first to get sort of picked on when the batting goes bad. Jofra Archer seems to often be the first person that people go to when the pace bowling fluctuates in terms of speed or whatever. And I think it's a little bit unfair, but also it does raise an interesting point because someone like Jofra Archer, what is the best form of Jofra Archer in Test cricket? Is it the guy that bowled that spell to Steve Smith at Lords in 2019, where he was averaging like 96 miles per hour, or his fastest ball was 96 miles per hour? Or is it the Jofra Archer that bowls at 86, 87 miles per hour with a bit of skill, which we know he can do? He gets quite tight to the stumps and can swing the ball a little bit when everything is going well. Or is that the optimal Jofra Archer? And I sometimes feel like maybe I don't know. Well, I don't know if he's fed mixed messages or, he does both kind of equally well or equally not so well, depending on how his day is going. And maybe we tend to kind of just see everything as one. We don't really know exactly what his best is. And he was someone that was specifically earmarked for the series, for that high pace. So just from that narrative, you would expect maybe the best use of him is to try and bowl as quickly as possible in short spells, and try and kind of replicate what Mitchell Johnson did in that 2013-14 series. But then you think, had Mark Wood made it through the series, he would have been that guy to bowl those short spells. And, is there any point having two people bowling, that fast? And then you look at someone like Bryden Carse, who, he doesn't reach those same high speeds when he's at his best. But, what is his role in the side? Is it to be that enforcer role, that guy that just keeps running in, which he's often praised for, and he does that well? But is that his best role, or is it to try and be a bit more disciplined? Gus Atkinson is someone who probably is the most kind of line and length bowler in this attack, but we've seen since he started that he has struggled to maintain speeds within days, within tests, and definitely across series, where his average speeds go down steadily. This series, the start of it hasn't been great for him. He's obviously been hit quite a bit, and he's only picked up a handful of wickets, often when the game has kind of gone. So, it makes for an interesting question. And then, given the fact that there are some question marks here, and the fact that England's bowling attack, no matter how many good intentions you have, if they're not able to sustain that speed, if that is what they want from this attack, then you enter that territory that England were trying so hard to eradicate, which is, a legion of bowlers that kind of end up becoming fast medium again and having a bit of a sameness to them. And then that becomes the very thing that you were trying to eradicate. Now, in my opinion, I don't think high air speed alone is what is needed. There's a clip that's been resurfacing again of something Rob Key mentioned a while ago, where he felt that 75 miles per hour bowlers can't really, they don't work in Test cricket. But there have been plenty of bowlers who, okay, sure, they're not as slow as 75, but they're often about 80 miles per hour, 81 miles per hour. Guys like Vernon Philander, we saw Michael Neser at the Gabba, guys that can still have success if you ally bowling with that speed to good field positioning, good captaincy, and just discipline. I think there is still room for bowlers of that speed to have success. So I personally don't buy into that. Just given the Test cricket that I've seen over the years, and the sides that have done well, and the kind of variety you've had in attacks, when those sides have done well, especially in Australia. And it also, having this kind of stubborn mindset also does, I think, impact how they view the spinner, because maybe they feel like, okay, sure, Shoaib Bashir is not a Nathan Lyon. Will Jacks is not a Nathan Lyon. But picking a spinner just for that inherent variation, can sometimes have its value. It might buy a wicket here and there where the pace bowlers are just not, they've become too predictable and the batters are too comfortable. Maybe a spin bowler, even if he is a little bit erratic, can still bring about something positive. So, maybe this whole pace bowling obsession is affecting, their use of the spinner. So I would, as just someone that has watched a lot of Test cricket, like many of you, I would just urge England to maybe move away from these stubborn mantras that 2 years, 3 years ago, we felt like this was the best ploy. We're going to stick to it because that's what we said, and clearly it hasn't been working. We've been seeing glimpses of this strategy fall apart over the last couple of years since the end of that 2023 Ashes series, where they've gone abroad and certain conditions have demanded certain things and they just have been too stubborn to try anything. I would just urge them to maybe reconsider. It's already too late given it's we're at the third test, but if they are going to start trying to be a bit more malleable, now's the time, because I think as much as most of the issues are in the batting, I think the bowling, there are still areas where they can optimize, I think, in the variation of that attack, how they're used on field, but also, how they view the spinner. Because I'm a big one that, spin, I think you need a spinner for variety's sake. Wherever you go. For Australia, there was a lot of discussions and arguments about whether leaving Nathan Lyon out, even though Michael Neser bowled brilliantly and did what he was brought in the side to do, could Nathan Lyon have been, should they have just stuck with Nathan Lyon? Because during those periods where Stokes and Jacks were batting well, or Joe Root was batting well in the first innings, could Nathan Lyon have just done what he usually does and maybe curtailed England's innings both times earlier? Given Nathan Lyon is, in my mind, the best well-rounded Test spinner of the last, since his debut, really, or certainly since he became a permanent in the side around that 2014-15 period. Given how good he is, I think there's always room for Nathan Lyon in this Australian side. I hope that they go back to him. I think he makes that side just a much more strong and dynamic side, and just gives them that kind of variation that always helps, as I say. The other big news, which obviously it happened a couple of weeks ago now, but it's something that I wanted to talk about because it involved, again, a crazy result and the sort of result that I hope England do pay attention to, because it was an example of a side adapting against the odds and doing what needed to be done to get the result. And that was South Africa winning 2-0 against India in India, the second time that they've completed a whitewash of India in India, the first one being in 2000. And it was, again, an example of how Temba Bavuma is building possibly the next great South African Test side. Again, it's I don't want to be someone that deals in hyperbole and someone that jumps the gun, because I do think that in the South African side there are a lot of players that are only just starting, and until they have a few tours in various places, I'm not going to sit here and say that these are everyone's world beaters. I think for any new player in any country, you have to wait until they've had a couple of series. But just results wise, as a team, what Temba Bavuma has been accomplishing quietly over the last 2-3 years has been incredible. And it takes me back to all the flack that they received when they won the World Test Championship in the summer of this year against Australia, where there were so many comments, unjustified comments in my point of view, that they didn't deserve it, they had the easy route, and this, that, and the other. And I think all of that was pure nonsense, and I'll tell you why. So firstly, as a team, you can only play the sides that are in your fixtures list. They don't decide it. It's just given to them. They have to just play who they're told to play. Secondly, the things that kept coming out was that they didn't play one of the big three sides, which was obviously England, India, and Australia. And you look at their campaign in that 2023-25 cycle. They had a series against India. It was at home, so you can say home advantage or whatever, but they still had a series against India, and they drew that series. Sure, they didn't play England in that cycle, fair enough. But on the way to lifting that mace, they technically played Australia in the final. Now, yes, it wasn't a 2-3 test match series prior to the final, which it would impact qualification. I understand that, but technically, on the way to getting that mace, they played India, they played Australia, and as I said, they drew against India and they beat Australia in the final. They did everything that they possibly could in a range of conditions, again, including some of the best teams in terms of form and reputation. And they did everything that they could. Number three, to those that say certain countries were easy to play and so on, I'm a firm believer that in Test cricket, every country poses their own set of challenges. Every country's conditions presents their own hurdles and their own issues that you have to overcome, and you have to where you have to adapt. And the reason I say that is some of the sides that do have that reputation of being the best test sides, while they do win a lot of games, you sometimes see in their results list that they struggle in a country that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to struggle in. So, for example, England haven't won a test series in the West Indies since 2004, I believe. Similarly, India are yet to beat South Africa in South Africa. You sometimes see these kind of I wouldn't say anomalies, but just these kind of occurrences, which makes you wonder, if certain countries are supposedly easier to beat, in terms of how people perceive things. Why is it that isn't always the case across the board? I do believe that all countries on their day can be competitive in Test cricket, and we've seen that sometimes teams that the underdogs do still pull off these incredible victories, sometimes even series victories against sides that you wouldn't expect them to beat. So for that reason, I don't believe that certain series are necessarily inherently easier than others just because of who they might be. I think we've seen too often, I think, that teams over time we see a mixture of wins and losses from all teams, and so that's why I personally don't subscribe to that particular kind of criticism of South Africa's campaign in the last cycle. However, do I think that the World Test Championship structure is optimal? No, I certainly don't, and I want to make that clear. For me, the biggest issue is the lopsided allocation of fixtures. The fact that you have some teams playing, 16, 20 tests, while others play maybe 11 or 12, and I know that they've structured it such that the points and everything kind of get normalized and standardized using the percentage points metric. But a lot of Test cricket is in some of the intangible things. It's not the numbers you see, but it's the kind of what goes into things on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. I think that sometimes the best series happen when teams have had like a cadence of playing Test cricket coming into a big series where they've been playing regularly, and playing regularly impacts strategy on field and identifying roles for players. It helps with consistency of selection. When you have Test series so far apart, sometimes players just if their living is to be a cricketer and they're not getting to play enough to sustain themselves, and they have to feed their families and so on, they're gonna potentially retire from a format and move on to something else. Whereas, and you might end up in doing that, you might lose a player, a key player. Whereas if you have regular fixtures and you have games, regularly, you can build up sort of a core of players that can settle into their roles, that can become close with one another. That camaraderie, especially on away tours when things can get tough, that all helps, I think. And so even just for that reason, having such lopsided fixtures is for me the most frustrating thing, because it really kind of short changes some of the nations outside of England, Australia, and India. And I mean, I don't know what the fix is for that. Obviously, financial implications play a big part in all of this, and I understand that. But just from a playing point of view, and just from a watching, and just the fact that international cricket is better when all countries are involved, I think just for that reason, I hope that we see some more fixtures get given to all the countries. But just going back to South Africa, I think what they did in that first cycle where they won was incredible. But if they did feel like they had to silence some of the doubters, how they started their title defense in this cycle has been just the best thing, because for a side from Senna to have to play in Pakistan and India first up, probably the hardest challenge you're going to get. They managed to draw in Pakistan, and they've obviously won here in India. And I think the big reason for that, obviously, whenever there's a series and you have a result, there are two stories. It's usually one team, the things that one team has done well, and it's the thing maybe one team hasn't done so well. Just starting with South Africa and what they achieved in India, India and Pakistan, but I guess we saw it more emphatically in India, and that was the fact that they have such a well-rounded bowling attack now, and well, they have a well-rounded team in general. They have batters that are so adaptable, but they have a bowling attack now that is so well-rounded. And when I think back to the great South African sides, and certainly Graeme Smith's side, it is a side that used to be very kind of open about wanting to be adaptable. Graeme Smith had that Protea Fire initiative, which was to, I think, look at the Protea flower and how it's resilient and I think grows back stronger after it's been I think damaged by I think volcanic lava or something along those lines. And he wanted to imbue that into the side, and that no matter where you're playing, what the conditions, we will find a way with these players to adapt and to get the job done. And I think we're seeing that with Temba Bavuma side at the moment. When was the last time we saw a South African side rely on their spinners to be the chief wicket takers? You think of spinners to have played for South Africa over the years, certainly since I've been watching, guys like Nicky Boyer, Paul Adams, Paul Harris, Imran Tahir a little bit, Robin Peterson. These were guys that were perfectly fine spinners, but they served a role in a pace bowling dominated attack. They mainly bowled sort of circuit breaking overs to help their pace bowlers, who are so adaptable and versatile, to kind of rest and then come back and get the wickets. You think back to when South Africa played well in India during the Graeme Smith regime. You think back to mainly spells from Dale Steyn getting 5 wickets and 7 fours, not necessarily the spinners spinning the teams out. Whereas so far against Pakistan and India in this test cycle, they've had Simon Harmer, Keshav Maharaj, and Sundaran Muthusamy, 3 genuine spin bowlers, all of whom offer something a little bit different, and they all bowl well as a pack. And then they are aided and supplemented by guys like Marco Jansen, Wian Mulder, and Rabada didn't even play in this series against India. So you look at that bowling attack and you just think it's a really well-rounded attack, and I think that went a long way to South Africa competing, but also winning in India. But then the other part of it is South Africa, their batting, and how they were able to do what was needed to get enough runs for their bowlers to work with. In that first test, Simon Harmer got the man of the match. for, I think, an 8-wicket haul, but 8-wicket haul across the game. But Temba Bavuma's 50 in that second innings, I think that's what really set up the game and gave South Africa just enough runs to give Simon Harmer enough to bowl at. And I think Simon Harmer himself mentioned in a inside the changing room player interview thing that they put out on social media that he felt that maybe Bavuma also deserved it. And it's those kind of innings that we've seen from South African sides over the years so often in away conditions where they've done well. You think back to that Adelaide test in 2012 where Faf du Plessis on debut, and de Villiers and Callis played out like a billion balls to try and preserve, to save that game and to give themselves a chance in the next game to win. It's those kind of performances that make South Africa such a good test side when they're playing well. And I think for South Africa that went a long way, to them winning the series. But obviously, as I mentioned, these kind of results, often there are two sides to it. India, Indian fans will be looking and wondering, how has this happened for the second time in 13 months, being whitewashed at home? Obviously, the first being New Zealand, sort of this time last year. And, you think of how they went in Australia last winter, in December last year, losing 3-1 in Australia, and just how, in this kind of new Gautam Gambhir era, the results in red ball cricket haven't been what, we all are used to from India, home or away. And, I guess for Indian fans, it's sort of, what is the, is it time to panic? Is it not? From my point of view, I don't think it is time to panic. I think, firstly, this is the first time in probably 20-25 years that really the team is in such transition. I can't remember, since I've been following cricket since like 2002, since a time where the Indian Test team have had so many positions potentially up for grabs in the Test side. You look at the top 5, the top 6, top 7. It's only recently that maybe ahead of that Border Gavaskar series that maybe some of the newer players that would take over from Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma were kind of being included in the squads. And now they're obviously getting their chance full time, since Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma have retired and Pujara and Rahane are no longer there. But, it's really the first full year that they're getting to play together and to work out who they are as a player in Test cricket. So many of these players come with they play a lot of Ranji Trophy and are very successful, but obviously finding your identity at international level is probably a different thing. And until they have a bit of time to work out, who they are as players, what their role is within the bigger picture of Indian red ball cricket, and you have a bit of consistency in, I guess, selection, which is a point I want to mention in a moment. Until you have all those things, it's, I think there will be periods where you lose some games, more games than you would like. And I think that's what we're finding at the moment. The bowling attack is still, I think, pretty strong, but there is a point that I want to come on to in a moment with the bowling attack. But the batters especially are sort of, they are new as a collective, and even some of the senior players are kind of moving up and down the order. And I do think the one area which might be hurting this red ball side at the moment is not the fact that they're trying new players, because that is normal when players of the caliber of Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma retire. You might have to try a few players to find who your next main person is that you're going to stick with. But it's, once you've selected them, sticking with a certain order in the batting lineup. I think we've seen some batters move up and down the order quite a lot, even in the space of a year. And I feel like that can't be good for a young batter trying to find his feet. We saw Sai Sudarshan be in and out of the side. We've seen Washington Sundar go from anywhere from 3 to 7 or 8. Even KL Rahul he's been made an opener again for the last year, but he's also been in and out at times of the side. But there's been a lot of kind of shuffling here and there. Jadeja sometimes batting a little bit higher than you would think, and all those kind of things, which I think probably isn't helping a young player. Now, you might look at a team like Australia and wonder, they've been quite open. Pat Cummins and Andrew McDonald have been quite open about how they don't think Test batting orders are necessarily that important. And, if you have your best 7 batters in the country, you can potentially mix and match them. But I think with Australia, the difference is the 7 batters that they generally are working with are seasoned Test batters that have been playing for, at least a decade, a lot of them, some of them more than that. And they know their games inside and out. Most of them, they probably know what to fall back on if things don't quite work out, and sort of how maybe how to react and where what to turn to if things don't go well. You think of Stephen Smith trying to open. It didn't quite work it didn't really work at all, to be honest. But he recognized that, and then he I think maybe voluntarily wanted to go back to number 4. We've seen Cameron Green go up and down the order. Even Usman Khawaja, was in the middle order for a while. Then he went higher up the order. There were even talks of Mitchell Marsh maybe coming in as an opener just for the Ashes series. So, they have talked about it, and we've seen Travis Head go up to the opening slot in subcontinental tours, but generally when Khawaja has been fit, he bats later. But, as I say, they, as a team, have been together for much longer. They've had a lot of success, and they probably know individually their games inside and out. Whereas this young Indian side are still finding their feet, I think, a lot of them. And so I would suggest maybe in the batting, that's one area where, moving forward, I would like to see some consistency, because I do think that will help a lot of these young batters. As far as technical stuff goes, I'm not going to sit here and say this is what you should have done against Simon Harmer. I have no idea. I haven't played international cricket. These are like genetically gifted, God gifted, individuals that can do things way better than I ever could. So I'm not going to suggest anything on that front. However, the one area that I do, again, have quite strong opinions on, and this isn't India specific, this is actually a general point about around the world, and and that point is on the pitches. And for some reason, when India play, a lot of unnecessary commentary comes around pitches, and how it aids spin too early and so on. And I personally don't have any issue with spin playing a big role from ball 1 of day 1. I know a lot of this comes from obviously the rules that were written a long time ago and so on. But just from a spectator's point of view, someone that likes watching Test cricket from all countries and what all the players from different nations can offer, I have no issue with spin playing such a big role early on. To me, it's no different if 19 wickets fall on day 1 to spin than 19 wickets falling on day 1 to pace. For me, if I was hypothetically a Test match batter, I would think that the coolest thing about that would be to play in these different conditions and know that if I wanted to be the best batter I could be and genuinely be considered as a great batter, that would mean having to find a game and adapt to all these different conditions and do well. Only then would I feel like I am a genuinely good, great batter. And so from that point of view, I would actually look forward to these kind of challenges. Similarly, from a watching point of view, I think it's cool knowing that when a certain country is going to a particular country on a tour, what the main challenge is going to be. If you're touring India, that spin is going to be the main threat. Similarly, in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, you know that spin is going to be your main challenge as a batter. I have to find a way of playing spin, scoring, and surviving against spin. Similarly, if you go to Australia at the moment, the pitches we're seeing, it's going to be pacey, bouncy. The pitches might crack a bit as time goes on, but you also have to contend with spin that bounces more and the bigger fields. So you have to find a game plan that works there. When you go to England, there might be more grass on the pitch. At least traditionally there was. Certainly this summer against India there wasn't, but traditionally there's that, and also the atmospheric conditions, which admittedly isn't pitch conditions, but that plays a big part in England, and obviously the ball, the Duke's ball, and so you need to find a completely different skill set to tap into to try and do well there. So for me, I like these challenges. I think it's really cool. And so when I hear people talk badly about certain pitches and others, I understand that there are rules that were once written, and I think that's why a lot of the angst sort of comes to the surface. And also there are financial implications to when a game finishes in 2 days. They incur a lot of financial losses, and people that paid for tickets may not get refunds and so on. And I understand that side of it, and so what I'm saying as a fan point of view isn't really feasible. I know that, but just from a watching and just a tactical technique point of view, I think it's pretty cool when you have pitches that offer something vastly different. And in India's case, obviously spin has been the main threat probably since 2021, since that tour against England, when England went there. However, the one area where I feel like, again, this affects all countries, where they put all their eggs in that one kind of pitch type basket, is that if you keep creating, or if you keep playing on certain pitches that offer something for one type of bowler. So for India, if there are spin heavy kind of pitches, or in Australia, if it's always very friendly towards pace bowling, how does that affect the overall development of young bowlers coming through the ranks and beginning your international career? So from my point of view, if I was a young Indian spin bowler, would I want to play on pitches that are always super spin friendly at home all the time? Or would I want to play on some that are spin friendly, but some that are maybe pace bowler friendly, or some that are batter friendly? And the reason I say that is I feel like where South Africa's spinners maybe had something a little bit extra over India's spinners in the series was the fact that guys like Simon Harmer, they're coming from a background of bowling spin in domestic cricket in England, but also in South Africa, where spin isn't really a thing, and so you have to rely on other things. We saw Simon Harmer bowling a lot of different trajectories, different speeds, at different positions on the crease, various things that maybe you become a little bit more comfortable resorting to when you've been brought up having to bowl spin on surfaces that are not overly spin friendly. Similarly, if you are brought up in a place where you bowl pace on maybe good batting wickets, you might have to learn how to find ways of getting wickets on those flat surfaces so that you have a game to turn to in those conditions. But then when you go to a bowler friendly place, it just becomes so much easier. And going back to South Africa, I think maybe that's where their spinners maybe thrived in the series against India, because sometimes I have felt with some of the Indian spinners recently in Test cricket is when the pitch spins, whether it's home or away, and it is predictable spin, and it is the pitch is really breaking up. There is no one better in world cricket than guys like Ravindra Jadeja, who just bowl, stump to stump at high pace and just beat both edges of the bat. I think, in those situations, Indian spinners are incredible, and subcontinental spinners in general are incredible. But sometimes when they play on pitches where it's not spinning so much, how comfortable do they feel resorting to some of these other plans or other air speeds and trajectories? Do they feel as comfortable doing that quicker than someone like Simon Harmer or a Nathan Lyon? Or do they try and stick to what has worked on those, spin-friendly conditions? And again, the same thing applies to pace bowlers who, if they are so used to getting wickets so easily in their home conditions in Senna, when they come up against, batters on a batting-friendly surface or even a spin-friendly surface, are they willing to resort to maybe cutters or talking to their captains and changing fields quicker and so on? How comfortable do they feel? And I think that's where if I was a young Indian spinner or a young seam bowler in Senna, that's where I would maybe want a bit more balance and variation in pitches across a series. I'm not saying you should only have one and not the other, because I like that variation and I think it poses different challenges and rounds you out as a cricketer. But if you play in certain extreme conditions over a long period of time, does that potentially stunt your overall development? And for example, Ravindra Jadeja at Headingley this summer against England, when on day 5 there was some rough outside Ben Duckett's off stump. I think a lot of commentators and pundits were screaming out for him to maybe slow down the pace a little bit and try and pitch it in that rough. And he did that a couple of times, but it seemed like he reverted back to what he knew or what he was more comfortable with maybe too soon. And it in the end, he maybe didn't bowl as much of that kind of variation as maybe we all wanted. Similarly, as great as Ravichandran Ashwin was, and he will go down as India's, along with Anil Kumble, like their two best spinners. He's right up there. But did we see the best of Ashwin outside of Asia? And admittedly, he didn't get many chances outside of Asia to perform, because when he was at his peak, obviously India had invested so heavily in their pace bowling attack, and a big reason why India did so well in places like Australia and England during that 2018 to 2021 period was because of their pace attack being able to get 20 wickets in those countries. And obviously spin takes a bit of a back seat to that. But had maybe Ashwin had chances to play in more of those kind of, a variety of surfaces, could we have seen him become this incredible, like he's already an incredible bowler, but just even better, getting wickets, fifers away from Asia? I guess we'll never know that, but that's where I think sometimes, at least in the recent past, guys like Nathan Lyon and Simon Harmer have had some success in Asia, because maybe they have, or they're a bit more comfortable, working with a plan A and B, as opposed to maybe some bowlers from the subcontinent. But by the same token, the fact that we see so many pace bowlers from the subcontinent have to bowl on maybe pitches that aren't suitable for pace bowling, maybe that's why we see so many more aggressive spells, incisive spells from bowlers from the subcontinent in places like England and Australia. Now, you think of how well Jasprit Bumrah bowls away from India. You think of even someone like Amir Jamal for Pakistan, who in Australia a couple of winters ago now got so many wickets, maybe because he had developed a game in conditions which aren't necessarily conducive to pace bowling, but when he got on surfaces that helped him, it just elevated him that much more. So it does all even out a little bit. I'm just thinking from a if I'm a young player wanting to round out my game, what might be the best approach? Now, the thing that complicates it is the fact that it's the World Test Championship and points are on the line. And when there is such a thing as home advantage, and certain teams maybe don't play certain types of bowling in certain conditions well, you want to try and capitalize on that. And that's normal. That's what teams have done across the world for as long as cricket's been going on. So that, because points are on the line, that means that we may not see pitches with so much variation across a series. Obviously there's a spectrum of pitches, extremely batter friendly and extremely bowler friendly. And even extremely batter friendly wickets, I don't inherently have an issue with. It might make, a lot of the match potentially a bit boring because, you want to see bowlers also have some success across the 5 days, not just have success on the 5th day when maybe only then the pitch breaks up. But even on flat wickets, if the captaincy is on point and you see inventive fields and so on, and disciplined bowling, we have still seen bowlers take 20 wickets on batting friendly wickets. So it elevates I guess the best from the rest, and it makes you have to kind of tap into other strategies quicker to survive. So batting friendly wickets inherently I don't have an issue with. To me, the only type of wicket that is genuinely bad is a dangerous wicket. So one that is riddled with uneven bounce. The pitch is really breaking up from day one, and it is batters like faces are at threat of getting hit almost every other ball. But yeah, from South Africa's point of view, I go back to that adaptation, that ability to do what is needed in those conditions, and I think that's gone a long way to them winning the series in India. And for India, I just hope that there is no panic. I know there's so much. I grew up watching the Virat Kohli era. Well, I grew up watching the Tendulkar Dravid era first, and then the Virat Kohli Rohit Sharma era. I love that Ravi Shastri Virat Kohli axis, what they did with the team, how they kind of dominated at home, obviously, but then how they competed in places like Australia and England. And I know there's been a lot of nostalgia and sort of calls from fans to maybe kind of entice some of those big names to come out of retirement. And while I understand it, this kind of transition period, it's normal for any great, at the end of any great era of cricket. We've seen it for a lot of different countries, and it's probably the first time in a long time it's kind of happening before our eyes with Indian cricket. But there's so much good talent, so much great talent, natural talent in Indian cricket. I don't think that there is any need to panic. I think if some of the recently retired players were to come back, it would be a conversation again that would need to be had in a year's time, where everyone is a year older and they might have to move on again anyway. I think that now is the time to invest in the next crop of young players who in maybe 5 years' time can give Indian fans, Indian cricket and world cricket that solid Indian team again, which will potentially go down as one of the great sides, because again there's so much talent. We see it in the IPL all the time, and we've seen glimpses of it in Test matches. Guys like Yashasvi Jaiswal, Rishabh Pant we already know, obviously, and the bowling. Jasprit Bumrah is incredible. Kuldeep Yadav is someone that I hope gets more exposure to places away from India as well. I think he's such a good bowler, and I hope India really invest in him and make him sort of a well-rounded threat in all conditions. But there are players there that you can build a side around. I just think a bit of consistency in selection and batting position I think will help. But there, as I say, there's so much good stuff in Indian cricket. I don't think there's any room to panic. I know the memories that Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma and Tendulkar and Dravid gave us were incredible, and so many of us grew up with that era. We all have probably those DVDs of those great series, like the 2001 series, India, Australia, the 2018-19 and 2021 series against Australia, the 2021 series in England, where India were 2-1 up, 2-1 up, 2-1 up. Got a series like that. Obviously, that's why we Indian fans feel so much pain. But I think some good stuff is around the corner if if we're all patient with it, because I like I say, there's too much talent for this transition period to go on for too long a time. And for South Africa, I've always loved watching South African cricket. I think when they're on top, when they're on song, they are probably the most adaptable side in Test cricket. You think of what Graeme Smith's side accomplished between 2007 and 2014, where I think they went 12 series away from home without losing a single one, and won, I think, about 8 of them. In all the conditions you would think most teams would lose in, they managed it. This Temba Bavuma side, it seems to be building towards something like that. Again, it's too early to say, but just as a team, what they've achieved in so many different conditions against so many different teams now, it's an exciting period. I think Temba Bavuma is someone I respect hugely. He's received a lot of criticism for a number of reasons, obviously, that are well documented, that I don't really want to go into, but what he's done through just performance is just incredible. And so South African cricket looks to be in a really strong place, and I look forward to seeing where they go from here. Well, that's the end of the first episode of the Mostly Cricket podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. As the weeks go on, I'll obviously discuss different topics. I'll discuss the one-day series India, South Africa have just played in. There's obviously the New Zealand West Indies Test series, in which West Indies have had an incredible result and shown some unbelievable resilience to draw that game. So much good cricket's going on. I'll be with you probably next week for the next episode. But in the meantime, if you've enjoyed any of the content on this channel, and in particular this episode, please like, subscribe, share, comment. It would really help me out. And yeah, until next time, take care.